Tonight, we again had the opportunity to spend an entire class sensitizing ourselves, who we really are, how did God make us, what He wants from us, what are we capable of being. All right, so we are continuing what we were discussing last week, where we were looking at the Torah portion. We were like, wow, it's amazing. It's actually very interesting because I had a lot of people at my Shabbos table, and suddenly we got onto discussing this idea from a very different vantage point, like the last verse in the Torah portion on the giving of the Torah, like the Ten Commandments, is build a ramp. People brought in their ideas. I brought in what we discussed. Very obviously something very strong. And as we understood it, it's a very strong message of the enormous significance of modesty. If you remember the point, the priests were wearing pants. You might not have known they were wearing pants because you saw a cloak that went down to their ankles, and the pants were like shorts. They went, I think, to their knees. They were wearing pants. And the only thing under them would have been stones anyway. And still, no, we can't disgrace those stones with nakedness if you weren't wearing pants, but you are anyway. We need in God's temple modesty. And that's what we discussed last week. And it was very relevant. It was relevant for me, helped me. It helped other people as well. Anyone did anything different this past week because of that? I know not everyone on there was on last week, so if you didn't do anything different, you get a complete pass. Anyone that was on remembered or was affected or made some different choices because of it?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Right away. I have someone.
So my daughter told me she was meeting with the doctor, and she told me I'm way too friendly to my doctors, whether they're male or female. So I went to the doctor today, and it was the same doctor she made that comment at. And I was extra careful before I walked in there. I'm like, okay, I got to be my own Beis Hamikdash for Hashem. I'm going to be very just regular, to myself, really, and just kind of like lay low. And I was much more careful and very aware. And it felt good. It felt right.
That is amazing. And I struggle with that also. Not so much with doctors, but I struggle with that with male guests in my home. Most of the people that come to my home as guests are people that are in the process of getting closer to God, returning to Judaism. So I have sort of this like mandate inside of me to be friendly, warm, inviting. I want them to feel how friendly and warm and inviting Judaism is. And then I feel this conflict between that regal, refined modesty, like pull back, and that desire. And I've learned over the years to balance it. My greatest personal strategy is getting my kids to be warm and friendly instead of me. But yeah, I totally relate, and wow, that's amazing. It's such a good feeling because, you talk, and of course the goal of every time we meet is for personal change, personal growth, getting closer to God. And it's so nice to see, like, yes, there was a carryover. Anyone else made any choice different this week because of that? If you don't want to share, don't worry. I still feel good because of what Shira just said. But anyone else? Dina.
Well, I actually didn't catch what we were talking until what the actual comment was. I just caught your response. And I also relate. I work in an office full of men. And that, like, reconciling both being friendly and communicative and also being in a regal space is something I deal with so much on a daily basis. So just trying to be more aware of it. And yeah.
Awareness is about 50% of the cure. Seriously, when we're aware of it, we know what to do. We know how to be polite, appropriate, and not too warm. Like, not too friendly, just appropriate, businesslike. So the awareness is great. As long as you stay aware, I'm sure what you're doing follows that awareness. And that's yeah. If it's a daily challenge, you've probably gotten quite good at it.
Really, it's so hard because I also work with men who are, sometimes they're single because they're working with kids. So that's another like awareness of, I definitely want to create a very strong boundary. And sometimes they're not so aware or socially like with it. So I have to create an even stronger boundary. And then of course I also want to be a good supervisor, and it's something that, like, with every person, every team member, everything is another. I think it's like my biggest challenge. Yeah. Any and all advice is appreciated.
Well, hopefully something from the class tonight and last week, between the two, that will be what you needed to hear, and it will help keep you focused and put God first and say, I'm a supervisor. These guys have no boundaries, and I'm going to carry it for both of us. Definitely, I think in all situations, which of course I think Shira's situation in a different way, and mine in a different way, yours in a different way, and I'm sure we're not the only one on that deals with this. Yeah, very often we have to, I mean, in the world today, I mean, yesterday I went to a Shiva call, people that are like a little religious, and the man, I mean, he was an older man, trust me, I'm sure he was probably in his early 80s. But he started talking to me, and he stood a little too close, and he was being a little too friendly, and yeah, I was just like, quiet. I just let him be, but I wasn't responding because it didn't feel right. Even though he was in his 80s, there were a lot of other people around. The interaction didn't feel like it's supposed to feel. So definitely, the more we're sensitized, the more we will have to step up, and we do step up, even if the world around us is, out to lunch on the whole idea. So this idea is really, Adina used the word malchus. Malchut is sovereignty. Malchus is a state of being. It's a state of being noble. Now, of course, in the world around us, what the word royal means someone that has a lot of privileges, a lot of money, a lot of power. Even today, I'm told the British royal family is like one of the most powerful families in the world. We call them figureheads, but they got a lot of power and a lot of money, and they're doing a lot of things with it. So that's what royal has become in our world. But that's not the original version, because the original version is how we emulate God's royalty. That's the Jewish version. And royalty, nobility, sovereignty is a state of being that's very, very dignified. That's a recipient of higher energies, which we would translate maybe as very gracious, very genteel, very godly. A very godly person should feel very noble. If you've ever been in contact with someone who's very godly, very holy, you should sense nobility. Nobility like they're living on a higher plane. Not they have a lot of power, not that they're exerting their power. The Jewish king was a servant to his people. The Jewish king, mirroring God's kingship, has nothing of his own. A farmer, he needs food, he goes out, he plants. A king needs food, he's dependent on the people feeding him. He's dependent on the people giving him money. He has nothing of his own. He's completely serving the people. That's the Jewish version of a king. A good king, a godly king, is serving the people, is receiving the energies from God, and then nurturing the people with those energies. Like a good mother, like a good wife, royalty. So, as I think we touched on last week a little towards the end of the class, for a lot of us, when these ideas bounce around in our heads, we're not so comfortable with them. Because, I'm American. I'm very much 21st century American, and Americans want to be comfortable, relaxed, sovereignty, nobility, dignity, gracious, genteel. Those words they're not part of our repertoire. But that's really our inner nature. So when we, like Shira's example or Dina's example, what we're really doing is saying, well, my real nature would be to be warm and friendly and out there. And wait, I have a deeper nature. I have something inside of me that's more true than the culture I've acquired. I've become accultured to thinking something is the right way, the best way, the good way to behave. But underneath all that, there's me, that true Jewish American princess, the real version of a Jewish American princess, which means royal. Because I'm God's child. I'm his billboard. I express his energy. And sometimes we're helped by this if we can think of a role model. Maybe we read an inspiring book about someone of a previous generation of our times who very much embodies this. Maybe we had a teacher, a rebbitzin, a neighbor, a relative, a grandparent. It helps if we can think of someone that makes it real to us. Because again, in our world, most people talk like this. We can align ourselves, sort of like how that person held herself, how she, it could be a man also, by the way. I'm going in the direction of she. Obviously, this applies to men as well. If you don't have anyone like that in your mindset, another technique to try is feeling I'm in God's presence. I want to act like I'm in God's presence. because I am in God's presence. Sometimes we can think of it like that. Like, if God was right here, how would I be? Or again, if thinking of God is too hard for you, think of some very, very great person that you admire, that you've read about, you've connected to, you know of. If this great tzaddik, if this great tzaddikus, this holy, godly person was right here in my kitchen watching me, would I behave? You might even think if my neighbor was here, how would I behave? Sometimes that's good if you're about to lose it with your kids or your husband. But how much more so someone really admiring? How would I behave? No, I would be just me. Maybe not. Maybe you'd be a deeper you, a more God resonating, noble you.
By the way, Mr. and I do that sometimes. If I'm about to like lose with the kids, I'll pretend there's like a video camera watching me. And like what I really
does it help?
want to replay that. It does help. It actually does. When I actually do it and remember, it does help for sure.
Good. I'm so glad I mentioned that because I think, I mean, it sounds like pathetic, but it's not at all. Actually, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the greatest sages we ever had, I'm sure he's going to be from the 70 of the Sanhedrin by Mashiach. You know, sometimes you think, I mean, if you think along those lines, if you make Mashiach real, there's going to be a Sanhedrin. And the 70 greatest sages of all times will be on that Sanhedrin. 70, you know? I mean, I assume Rambam's going to be there, you know? I assume Rabbi Akiva. And I assume Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saved Torah for the Jewish people. And before his passing, as his students were surrounding him, his bed, they said, bless us. And he said, I bless you that your fear of God should be like your fear of man. And they said, as I would put it, that's a blessing? And he said, yes, if a man's watching, you're not going to sin. You can take it straight from him. All right? Now we have a good technique. For someone, it might be their kids. For someone, it might be their husband. Envisioning that video camera, envisioning that neighbor who's going to tell everyone else on the block. If it helps, use it. And in this case, again, we're saying even more to raise yourself to a higher level of a regal behavior. A regal behavior. Now again, your neighbor it might not work for, and the video camera it might not work for. But if you think of someone you really admire, you really respect, and they're there for some reason, you're hosting them. For some strange reason, they came to Chicago. For some strange reason, they're in your house. If I've ever had that experience, I have many, many years ago. Had two very great Hasidim, very, 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 very special, very, very holy people that were in my house. And like, you feel it. Like you feel it in the energy. Whoa. And you act different. How you can find ways inside yourself for this regal, which is really important for you, important for the people around you, even just giving them a window into a godly life. Dina?
I think what I am going to try to do is like script certain lines for boundaries, because I think like the problem is that like, for me at least, I'm like already into the behavior that is maybe like not where I want to be, and then I can't really get out of it. I'm too deep into a conversation to like remove myself, or I feel like I am. So just like being able to have a scripted line to remove myself.
I think that's a great idea. And it's, by the way, a good tip for other situations as well. Because when we're in the moment, it's really hard. Some of us might try to script some lines for extricating ourselves from issues with our children, or script lines with our mother-in-laws or parents or siblings. So that's a very good tip, because in the moment, most of our brains like freeze. And sometimes I like practice those lines out loud or in my brain a few times before. So it's very natural off my lips, because it's like muscle memory. It's just a very natural thing for me to say. So I think that's great. When we were discussing a few classes ago, what to do if they're gossiping around you and you are really not going to do that, same idea. Scripting lines really helps, and practicing them beforehand. Aliza, do you have another tip?
Regarding, I guess, the video camera concept. So for me, it's very concrete. I don't know if it's going to be as helpful for everybody else, but I'm sharing in case it might be. So I grew up going to work with my father when I would have a day off, and I could. And I was always thrilled to sit in, if there was no jury, sit in the jury box. My father was known as the honest judge, which is a sad statement in Cook County, but beautiful Kiddush Hashem in terms of my father. So there's a court reporter in the court. And the court reporter's job is to literally record in shorthand on this, like, you know, sort of like a typewriter, every single word that is said by everyone who is, whether it's the judge, the lawyers, the witnesses, the whatever. And my father would always say to me, don't think that court reporter is what matters the most. There's a court reporter going on everywhere you are by Hashem.
Stenographer somewhere, jotting it all down. If that works for you, go for it. And I think the whole some would say, oh, I don't want to think like that. Murder can be intense. I want to think of 100 things. Different ideas are being presented. Grab what works, drop the rest. It's different people's tips, different people's perspectives. We all struggle. Some people struggle with focus. Somebody might not at all struggle with focus, but struggle with your thoughts. All interesting to me to see the change in my eyes when I removed myself. And I was sincerely trying to understand it before. But when I removed myself from it, when I stopped, when I made a conscious effort and spent the money and sewed up my slits, I could actually see the problem. Again, it's so, and sometimes you can't. I remember once, many years ago, a woman that I was close to, a very refined, modest, genteel, noble woman, in a very delicate way, told me that one of my outfits she didn't think was like appropriate. Covered all the parts that have to be covered. Was not especially tight at all. But something about the material, whatever, the pattern, she was in a very nice way. I wasn't offended by her at all. But I was confused. I thought it was really nice. But I said to myself, you know what? If someone else thinks that, it's enough for me not to wear it anymore. So I put it in the giveaway bag, and someone else saw it and liked it so much they took it out and fixed it and wore it. It was a nice outfit. And a little bit, I could see the problem. A lot. It wouldn't have bothered my eyes, but a little bit I could see the problem. So it's really a sensitization process. And I'm saying very honestly, I don't think I'm the highest on the totem pole of sensitization, but I try to work. I try to like get to that space of understanding what with someone who's really noble, the innate space of every one of us, how would she process this? Some things are very obvious, like imagine someone going to an office in sweatpants. Well, I mean, not appropriate unless it's maybe casual Friday. Why? Because it's disrespectful to the atmosphere. It cheapens the atmosphere. We could like super comfortable oversized clothing, but they're not expressing the respect we need to convey. And it's not just in clothing. Obviously, there are cheap behaviors. Gossiping might seem to a very cheap behavior. So where is this in Torah? General in Torah, it's exactly what we said last week. It didn't change over a week. The source for modesty is in Devarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 23, verse 14, and a shovel should be among your equipment. And we spoke about this last week at length, so I was just reminding everyone that is the ultimate source of modesty. Soldiers in an army camp covering their excrement. Again, it's not talking about women's covering their elbows. It's talking about soldiers covering their excrement. And it so expresses to us that modesty is because God is present. God is walking in your camp, and we need a level of morality, of modesty, of dignity to allow God to feel welcome and not driven away. She was talking about the source in Torah for this. Now, in a sense, modesty is like all other laws, and actually, in a sense, it's super different. So I'm going to explain that a little bit. Again, our goal here is not to give any specific laws. I'm not planning on giving any specific laws. It's more to have a sensitization to the concept. Any specific laws, you can ask your specific rabbis, because some rabbis might rule differently, and that's everyone to know their personal situations. But once we are sensitized, we will surely walk the right road. So like all laws, and as I said, modesty in a way is very similar and in a way is very different. But like all laws, there's the biblical verse, and there's a lot of rabbis talking about it. There's early sources for modesty. There's later sources for modesty. There are areas where we derive the laws of modesty. There are three broad areas. Again, before we even get to that, what are the sources for our general perspective? So the sages say the sanctity of the home, the foundation of Jewish life, pretty significant things they're accrediting. Foundation of sanctity of home, foundation of Jewish life is maintained primarily through the laws of modesty. It's a very heavy statement. That's why I said it really slow. Why? Because modesty they attribute with creating an atmosphere of holiness and wholesomeness that permeates family life. And that's why, and this might sound really intense to us, and again, I'm not getting into specific laws, but the law is that in certain situations, a man is required, it's not optional, required to divorce his wife if she insists on disobeying the laws of modesty, which again is highlighting that the sages are saying, you can say she has her relationship to God, I have my relationship to God. I mean, I'm not her rabbi, she's not my rabbi. They say, well, in modesty, it doesn't exactly work that way. Because if she's going to flagrantly disobey those laws, it's affecting the whole religious energy of your home. And that's not something so trivial. That's not something you could say, it's her problem. No, it's your home. It's her problem. It's your problem. You're in this together, hopefully, and you have to create a home, as we said, like the soldiers in the army camp, where God is welcome. I'm just going to share this because it's such a great commercial for what I was just saying. So obviously any commercials we grab with both hands. So Shira said that I had mentioned her before. Maybe I mentioned to class this story with the slit, my personal story, my challenges and growth in modesty. And she said when I said it, when she heard it the first time from me, she thought it was really silly. Recently, she saw someone wearing that type of slit and it looked really inappropriate to her. And the commercial here is that's, in a sense, I say the word the goal very cautiously. Don't take it out of context. The goal doesn't mean to look at other people and think what they're doing is wrong. I don't mean it that way at all. What I mean is the goal is time, age, study, general working on our relationship with God sensitizes our eyes. I will definitely say very honestly, I don't know who's going to be watching this class. I didn't start with very sensitized eyes. I really didn't. I don't know why. Product of America. And a little bit, each time as I pushed myself to say, if this is what God's saying to do, that's what you do. If it makes sense to me or not as something wrong. If this is what the rabbis are coming out with, and I do research. I don't just take rumors. Obviously, I want to see. I want to make sure they're really saying it. But if this is what they're saying, if I get it or not, I got to step up to that plate because I want to do it right. And little by little, each step, it does change my eyesight. And I so appreciate that Shira shared that because that's the growth. That's what we want to happen. It's not a problem to say, when I was younger, I used to. If hopefully now we're older and we do it differently. Very special midrash that maybe you heard, maybe you never heard. If you heard it, you'll tolerate hearing it again. This is on Bereshit, on Genesis, chapter 18, verse 13. Really beginning, God's creating woman. So it says, as I'm sure we all know, that God created us from a rib that he took from man, from Adam. He took that rib and he fashioned it into woman. Now, in the Hebrew, the verse saying this says, vayiven, which in Hebrew would mean, and he built. But it also can mean, and he considered. So vayiven, God built this rib from man into woman, also can mean God considered this rib. On this, the Midrash says, Rabbi Yoshua says in the name of Rabbi Levi, that vayiven means consider because God was considering from what part of Adam's body he should create woman. Now again, God didn't know what he was going to do. I think God knew exactly what he was going to do, and this is a lesson for us. So God thought of the various body parts that he could build us from, and he said, not from the head, then she'll be very swell-headed. Not from the eyes, she's going to be too flirtatious. And he went through the various body parts and nixed them until he came to the rib. Why did he choose the rib? Because God said, this is the modest part of man. Why is a rib modest? Because even when man stands naked, that part is covered. Imagine the lesson God is giving us. And imagine the energy he gave us that he literally took the part that's modest, and that's what we are built from. And then the Midrash goes on and says, and as he created each limb of the body of the primordial woman, as he created each limb, he said, be a modest woman. It blows my mind, this Midrash. Again, very classical, very ancient, not cutting edge. You might have all learned it in school. You might not have learned it in school. But such a message to us. That's what God was thinking when he created me. Not be intelligent, not be the best mother, be modest. I don't have anything to say besides it's that important. And it's that challenging. Again, the two go hand in hand. Maybe because it's that important, that's why our evil inclinations say, if I want a lot of mileage for my money, if I want the maximum bang for my buck, let me get this area to fall apart. If it's the most important area, it's got the most power. It's that important. And for me, and maybe for others, that challenging. Now, I said that modesty is different than all other laws in a very significant way. And I'm going to share that now. With modesty, we have two broad sources for laws called da'as or da'at Moshe and da'as or da'at Yehudis or Yehudit. Both da'as Moshe and da'as Yehudis are absolutely binding on women today. Now, again, you might say, I don't need all this technical stuff. I came for the spiritual part, and that's fine. I'm not going to get into too much technical stuff, but I'm just sharing this in case you ever hear of these concepts and you never learned about them. When I was in school, they didn't teach it. I think now maybe they've upgraded and they teach more. But in modesty, unlike every other part of Judaism, we have these two law sources, da'as Moshe and da'as Yehudis. And I am going to bring out a sort of spiritual perspective on why we have both. Da'as Moshe are, laws, the normal, typical laws, the guidelines directly from Torah. A married woman must cover her hair. That's about as sourced as we can get, where it speaks of the woman who's suspected of adultery. Her husband warned her, and she still was alone with the man. And what do we do to disgrace this woman? We uncover her hair, from which we understand that a married woman's hair must be covered. So that's Torah. That's Das Moshe. That's permanent. That's institutionalized. That's unchanging. And that's like the laws of the Sabbath, of the Shabbos, of kosher, laws, Judaism. But by modesty, we have something additional that we have nowhere else. Da'as Yehudis. What is Da'as Yehudis? Well, Yehudis sounds like a woman. Exactly. That's what it's supposed to sound like. Da'as Yehudis means the accepted standard of modest dress in Jewish communities. The standards adopted by observant Jewish women that assume the status of law. That is unique for modesty. No other commandment is dependent on human decision. That doesn't say rely on your innate sense of kosher, rely on your innate sense of what is good and wrong and proper on the Shabbos. No. Shabbos, kosher, God tells us. But modesty, and again, I'm bringing this out because I think it's such a powerful message. God is saying, I created women with an innate sense of modesty. I can rely on you. I can rely on you to express that in your dress, in your demeanor. I trust you. I made you. I made you to be modest, and I know you can access that. And that's the source of Da'as Yehudis, which again, today is absolutely binding, but began by women's sensitization to the concept of modesty. And unlike Da'as Moshe, which is, biblical, so to speak, and from the rabbi's discussion, some aspects of Da'as Yehudis varied by place and by era. Not now, but originally, what was accepted in Spain 1,000 years ago and in Poland 600 years ago was different. It was different. Of course, now there are still some differences between certain places, but certain basic rules never changed. Today, that accumulation of wisdom called Da'as Yehudis is absolutely binding on every Jewish woman. There's those aspects that are Da'as Moshe. Woman cannot uncover her thigh. That's Da'as Moshe. That's written in the Talmud. But then there's the Da'as Yehudis aspect. And Da'as Yehudis aspect also comes from a sense of there are enough parts of modesty we didn't have to spell out. Not written in any of the early sources. Legit. Not written in the Talmud. Why isn't it written in the Talmud if it's so important? Understand why. Because there were things that never needed to be said. It was enough to say, dress, and act appropriately. And women knew what that meant. Nowadays, we really don't. So nowadays, it all has to be spelled out. Nowadays, we want to see everything black on white. We want to know the source. Who's the rabbi that said it? What's the source is coming from? We're very source oriented. But that's because we a little bit lost touch with ourselves. For hundreds and hundreds of years, our ancestors knew what it meant when God said, be modest. So it didn't have to be spelled out because we knew. Now it's spelled out. Now we might not know as much, but it's just very, yes?
Yeah. Is there in?
Yes.
Oh, it's working. Yay. I don't know if you said this, but I remember hearing that like if you have like boys, teenage boys and girls, and the girls, let's say, are immodest, then it kind of stays with them forever. And with the boys, they can be boys, you know, go to Israel from out and then come back. And like all of a sudden they're like these great people. And like their history doesn't matter.
Oh, I definitely did.
And the reason is because Hashem, the reason is because Hashem made women naturally. Can you hear me or no?
Now I hear you. Yes. So Hashem made women.
No. So Hashem made women naturally tznius. So for us, we're going out of like who we really are. For men, it's more, I guess, appropriate to act that way because they're men. So I'm just kind of feeding off of what you're saying, how like this is Hashem expects us from us and we could do it. When a woman's acting inappropriate, yeah, it's because they're just going out of who they really are. And that's why the reputation.
I don't know if I 100% agree, but I totally see the point you're saying. And I do agree with that point, that when a woman is not modest, she's harming something very precious that she has. And you're saying a man is by nature a little bit more animalistic to start with. So he's not messing anything up as grievously. I still feel that when men do things, of course, the carryover, of course, things impact all of us, not only in the realm of modesty. I mean, if we leave the realm of modesty to areas where we are more similar, I guess, in terms of spiritual energy to a man, which we, of course, we're not similar to a man in spiritual energy. That was a really not correct statement, but you know what I mean. If there was a period of time where someone stopped keeping the Shabbos, if there was a period of time where someone wasn't eating kosher, and then they stopped, unless they really work on themselves to become closer to God because of that, it's sort of residual damage that lasts more or less forever. On a certain level, it tarnishes us. But I totally agree with the point you're making, or whoever you're quoting from made, that a woman not being modest is harming something so deep. It's actually what it reminds me of what you're saying has to do with the idea of woman learning Gemara. That actually completely resonates with your point. So I'm going to share that idea. It says in the Talmud that women should not learn Talmud. Why? Because it's going to mess them up. Question is, well, what do you mean? I mean, if it's bad to learn Talmud, why are men learning Talmud? And if it's good to learn Talmud, what's your bias? What's your prejudice against women that they shouldn't learn Talmud? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke about this, and he explained, and again, it's exactly in sync, in a sense, with what she was saying, that women have a much higher than men level of belief in God, pure belief, acceptance of God, unquestioning belief. And therefore, the sages are saying, women, we don't want you to mess yourselves up. Talmud is very analytical. It's very questioning. It could almost breed a certain, I don't want to say skepticism, but a certain questioning eye. So a man who doesn't have this innate, deep, deep belief, unquestioning, absolute purity of belief, they should learn Talmud. They have a questioning mind anyway. Put it in Talmud. But a woman, you should mess up your advantage? Don't go there. And therefore, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, nowadays, women should learn Talmud. Because since anyway, I mean, the women of today are anyway learning secular subjects. So we're anyway exposed to analysis, questioning, not just taking everything on faith, you know, almost a little skeptical perspective. That's just our world. So if we already are in that space, go learn Talmud. Get that advantage. Otherwise, to mess up your purity, not worth it. I think that's also very in sync with what she was saying about a woman's special nature. And that's why if we harm ourselves in the realm of modesty, it's a deeper harm than if a man harms himself with this. And I do agree with her. I do feel that a man's harming himself is harm, but I do agree that a woman's is even deeper. Dina?
It's so interesting because recently I was with my sisters for Shabbos and she got a new wig and I was trying it on. She was like just showing me how it fits, and I'm single, so I don't wear a wig. And all of a sudden, and we were in like a common-ish like bathroom or something, or a hallway. And all of a sudden her husband walked past and I freaked out and like, or I had it off for a second and I freaked out and was like covering my head. And I was like, this is not my husband. I'm not married. Like, I don't at all have this mitzvah, but it was like so innate and it was like so in me. And I really like we all looked at each other like, what just happened? But it was so like ingrained within that we were like covering up, even though I was fully in a public area, sneeze, everything. So it's really like, it's interesting that you're talking about this now.
That is such a telling story. I have to say, a woman I'm close to, she was on the road to becoming religious, which means at that time she wasn't keeping Shabbos. She wasn't, I mean, she was moving, doing more and more things in Shabbos, more and more things in kosher, and very strange, very unusual for a woman holding there. She got a wig. You don't usually jump to getting a wig when you're just starting keeping Shabbos and kosher. I think if I remember the backstory is she was going to shul, she was going to synagogue, and she sort of felt, oh, she should be respectful. So maybe that was why, but she literally got a wig and she put it on and she went to shul, she went to synagogue in the wig, and she felt very good that she was wearing the wig in shul, and now she is looking like appropriate. And again, she was growing and everything. And I mean, today she's fully observant. And she felt very good about herself that she's wearing this wig. Okay, they had the prayers, they had the kiddush. She comes home, she takes it off, and I was home the rest of the day. And the next day was Sunday. And she and her husband were going to Sam's Club, very exciting Sunday excursion. And they got out of the parking lot. And she said, I feel naked. I can't go. I feel naked. He's looking at her like, what? She said, I can't go. I have to go back. And she literally went back home to put on her wig. And from that point on, whenever she leaves her home, she wears a wig. And again, this is a woman who was not 100%. I don't believe, again, I could be wrong, but I know she was in the process of growing in all areas. But it was just, and I think just certain things resonate. Certain souls, have that sensitivity. And it just was like, once she had it on once, she just felt undressed without it. So yeah, amazing story, Dina. So we have Das Moshe, Torah's instruction to us, and all the rabbis' discussion. We have Das Yehudis, what women expressed, because women have this innate modesty that has become part of our obligations. And as we said, much of that didn't have to be written and institutionalized because women knew. And then we have a third area, which is the customs of the local place, which basically means if where you live, all observant women adhere to a certain standard, the law is you have to follow it because it would be disrespectful to the community. It would be immodestly conspicuous to depart from the norm. Again, this only is for raising standards, not for lowering. If all women where you are lax in a certain area, that doesn't mean, yeah, go for it, be like everyone else. In some communities, even today, women don't drive. It's considered immodest. In most of the world, women do drive, and it's not considered immodest. But if you were in such a community, it literally will be wrong to drive, even though in the broader world it's not wrong, because you're deviating from the standard of the community. And that therefore creates this sense of lack of modesty. I'm not going to go into sources. I have some sources here from the Gemara, maybe to more clearly explain Das Moshe versus Das Yehudis, but I don't think we're going to have any time to go into that. So I'm just going to, again, going back to our shovel and the soldiers and what the sages say about that verse, violating the laws of modesty causes us to violate Torah, causes others to transgress, as obviously a man seeing a woman dressed immodestly is a transgression for him, and causes God's presence to depart. Dina.
Mrs. Turin, I was wondering in like remote areas when there either is no other Jews or not from people where there's a modesty standard, what is the protocol for that?
Law, meaning in most places it's Jewish law. This concept of the community applies in other areas also. Like, for example, live in Chicago. I mean, some of us live in Chicago. So in Chicago, our candlelighting time is 20 minutes before Shkia, before sunset. In most communities in the world, candlelighting time is 18 minutes before. But If you're in Chicago, even if you don't live in Chicago, when you come to Chicago, you light candles 20 minutes before. And conversely, if you're from Chicago and have therefore absorbed the Chicago candle lighting time, if you're in New York or in Florida, you also light 20 minutes before, even though the people around you are lighting 18 minutes before. So, and of course, if you were in Jerusalem, you'd light a lot, there's a lot earlier, it's much earlier there. So this concept of adhering to the standards of the community where you're in is expressive in other areas as well as modesty. But in modesty, it's even more pointed, because if there's a certain standard and you're not following it, you're very conspicuous, which therefore means you're more flagrantly, seemingly not modest. But if you're in a place which doesn't have any specific standard, it doesn't have to be, in, Oregon or wherever, Kentucky. It just doesn't have any specific standard of modesty. I don't think Chicago, I can't think of any specific standard that's unique to Chicago that I know of. So therefore, it's the laws. And again, we didn't really touch on any laws. My goal was not to touch on any laws, because certain rabbis do give certain different instructions. And if someone walks away from this class with a greater sensitization and has a question, I highly encourage you to ask your rabbi, what is your understanding? What is the standard to behave in, whatever your specific question is? But it's just following the Jewish law. Honestly, today, the only areas I can think of areas where there's maybe a higher standard are in more Hasidic places, where a lot of Hasidic people live, because they have really retained a lot of standards of modesty that's probably higher and more sensitized and different than the rest of us. So that's the only thing right now coming to my mind. If you were in Mea Shearim or Geula or one of these areas, or certain areas of Williamsburg, where you would feel, I'm not modest, I'm 100% modest now, but I don't seem to look like everyone else around. If you were living there, there would be that sense of, if you're wearing was 100% modest, but everyone else around you has a higher standard, it's not considered modest, relative, and therefore needs to change. All of us are growing. All of us are holding in different places. And the goal isn't how high or not are your heels, or how loud are the colors of your shoes, or how soft are your soles. It's really absorbing, for me, I'm talking personally, if I can absorb that midrash, that when God built me, he wanted to find the most modest part of the body for me to be from, and then still instructed every limb of my body to be modest. If I could absorb that, and I could remember that, I would make different choices. And my choices might be different than everyone else's here choices. We all might make different choices, but we would all be really expressing that beautiful thing that God implanted in us. And as Shira said, maybe we've tarnished it somewhat over various experiences in our life, but we can always polish the tarnish. We can always shed away that layer, and we can really access who we really are as God made us. And that's such a beautiful journey. Thank you.